Hello there and welcome to EPA Insights. I'm Laura from the Qualification Development team here at Highfield, and today I'm going to talk to you about the Retail Manager Standard, that's IFATE version 1.1 Assessment Plan APO2. So why EPA Insights? Well, we want to be able to share with you what we've learned since assessing on this standard. Now this includes an analysis of the grades and looking at any common trends, whilst also gaining assessor feedback and customer feedback where we may have had queries in the past. Now we hope that you find this useful. So firstly, in this video we are going to touch on the written exam, and then we're going to take a closer look at the other assessment methods with the work-based project, followed by the professional discussion. Then we'll finish off with some general hints and tips for endpoint assessment. So thinking about the written exam, it's ideally taken by e-assessment and can be invigilated by the assessor, employer, or our remote invigilation service. The exam lasts for 2 hours with 5 minutes of reading time, and it consists of 6 short and 2 longer scenario-based questions. There are 3 live test papers available. The written exam accounted for 42% of the total failed assessments that we analysed. So this highlights the importance of carrying out mock exams. There are 2 mock papers available within the EPA resources section on our website for learners to utilise. So moving on to the business project. The Retail Business Project tests the application of knowledge, skills and behaviours set out in the assessment plan. It ensures the apprentice understands today's industry and what the consumer wants in a retail business. It's designed to assess apprentices in a consistent way, irrespective of their particular workplace and their role within the company. This could be a project to prepare a 2-year strategy for a department in a larger retail unit, or an entire operation for a smaller organisation. It must look at opportunities and challenges. It could incorporate new ideas and must lead to a coherent plan which would be appropriate for the business, match the organisation's objectives, identify measurable improvements and make recommendations for implementation. The project should not focus on an immediate problem, opportunity or idea, but look from a strategic medium-term perspective. A proposal must be submitted at Gateway and the assessor will review this and contact the learner directly if it does not meet the brief, and a resubmission will need to be made within 7 days. So the project must be submitted for marking within the timescales detailed on the booking confirmation, which will be no later than 5 working days before the assessment. At the assessment, the learner must present their project to the assessor in a 30-minute presentation. They must also allow time for the assessor to ask questions within this time. The apprentice is required to provide supporting evidence to show that they have completed each of the underpinning activities that led them to the recommendations. The presentation time is not in itself sufficient to cover the full requirements, so apprentices must also supply supporting information to evidence the processes undertaken. These could include research findings, surveys or questionnaires or costings, for example. The project can be submitted in any format they wish, including a report or a supporting presentation. So we analysed a proportion of learner reports where learners had failed to pass in the business project. For each assessment criteria, you can see the proportion of learners who either passed, in orange, failed, or not attempted the assessment criteria. The higher proportion of brown means that learners in the main did not have the opportunity to attempt the criteria. Now we expect this to happen with distinction criteria where there was not the opportunity to stretch to these due to time constraints. The large proportion of red identifies criteria where there are higher rates of learners who have attempted the criteria but unfortunately not passed these, resulting in an overall fail. So let's look at some of the criteria learners are attempting but not passing, starting with the most common failed pass criteria in the project. BP6. Provide a detailed analysis of costs associated with the proposed recommendations. Now the trap here is that learners are only providing an outline of the costs. So they should provide a detailed analysis of the proposed costs associated with the project, considering any contingencies or other costs that could be encountered. BP8. Provide research methodology to demonstrate a logical, coherent approach. Now, the trap here is that learners are not including research in the project. So they should effectively design and use a research methodology that provides information or data in a way that can be analysed. They should ensure evidence of this is included in the project and detail how it was used. BP5. Consult relevant stakeholders, for example, customers, team members or managers, to inform the results and recommendations. So the trap here again is that learners have no evidence of consultation. They should provide evidence of stakeholder engagement when informing them of the results and recommendations. So moving on to the distinction criteria, which do require a further level of detail to demonstrate competence, there are also some of the most common criteria that were not even attempted. BP15. Provide evidence of wide consultation and show how responses have been effectively evaluated and their content considered and included in the recommendation. So the trap here is that learners are not using a wider range of stakeholders. They should prepare to reach out to stakeholders outside of their normal day-to-day environment. They should consider other functions that may be available to inform them, and they should provide evidence of this, which could include the stakeholders' feedback and responses. BP16. A thorough analysis of costs and benefits of the recommendations in the short, medium and long term. Now the trap is that learners are not analysing these considerations in the short, medium and long term. So they should consider if the project could be scaled up or rolled out on a larger scale. They should consider the startup cost and maintaining cost going forward, or the cost versus benefit analysis, for example. BP18. Effectively design and use a research methodology using qualitative and quantitative research to its best effect. Now the trap here is that learners are not including both quantitative and qualitative data. They should use both research methodologies to their best effect and present findings to support the project recommendations. So moving on to the professional discussion. Now the professional discussion is a structured discussion between the apprentice and the assessor that their employer can be present at. It will cover the period of learning, development and continuous assessment, coverage of the standard, and personal development and reflection. Now this should take place in a quiet environment where they won't be disturbed. Learners can use notes as long as they are of their own work and useful to the learner. So we analysed the proportion of learner reports where learners had failed to pass in the professional discussion. Now for each assessment criteria you can see the proportion of learners who have either passed, in orange, failed or not even been able to attempt the assessment criteria. Now the proportion of brown means that learners in the main did not have the opportunity to attempt the criteria, and we expect this to happen with the distinction criteria where there was not that opportunity to stretch to these due to time constraints or capability. We've identified other criteria where there are higher rates of learners who have attempted the criteria but unfortunately not passed. These seem to be the most common causes of failure within the professional discussion. Now, some apprentices struggle to give specific examples in the professional discussion. It is important that learners provide real examples of the activities they have undertaken as a retail manager during their time on programme. And remember, learners can prepare notes with examples they may wish to tell the assessor about in these key areas or use supporting evidence to demonstrate their competence against the standard. So let's take a look at some of those criteria that most commonly aren't passed within the professional discussion, starting with the pass criteria. Now PD1 appears with the highest failure rate. However, this criteria is covered holistically across the whole discussion and tends to be awarded if all of the pass criteria are met. So let's take a look at PS1. Explain the importance of keeping up to date with current industry trends and provide examples of how this has been achieved. So the trap is that some learners are unable to provide examples of how they have kept up to date. They should give examples of the activities or research carried out to ensure they are aware of product ranges, promotions and future trends that are emerging. FN7. Provide evidence to show they have been part of the budgeting and cost control in the organisation. Now the trap here is that some learners don't have exposure to budgets. So They should give an example of any budgeting they have been involved in. This does not need to include setting budgets and could include how they have adhered to them or suggested changes or saved costs in other areas to meet the budget, for example. LG6. Describe how the retail operation meets legislative and regulatory needs. Now, the trap here is that some learners are unaware of the legislative or regulatory needs, so they should describe how their business is meeting these needs. They should continuously review adherence to these and how they are trading safely and legally. So the distinction criteria with the highest fail rates are FN8. Describe how recommendations for the improvement of quality, cost, value or efficiency have been made and implemented in the organisation. Now the trap is that some learners don't describe how they make recommendations or communicate upwards. So they should give examples of any recommendations that they have made that have been implemented in the business. This could include more localised improvements made to their department or area of work, but should include how they made the recommendation or report outcomes. DS7. Demonstrate staff engagement, motivation, performance management, and how this has led to increased performance. So some learners have not had exposure to performance management. So they should prepare to not only give examples of engaging and motivating teams, but how they have identified performance issues and utilised tools or protocols to improve this performance. LE5. Provides mentorship to team members with measurable improvements to the performance of individuals and the team. Now, learners are not linking what improvements are made and how these are measured, so they should be prepared to give examples of providing mentorship to team members and explain how this then benefited the overall performance of the individual and the team. And lastly, we'll take a look at the criteria that have not been attempted during the professional discussion. LE4 explains how effective retail management and contingency planning have been developed and implemented, and how this has decreased downtime and increased overall departmental performance. So some learners are unaware of contingency plans or non-exist, so they should prepare to contextualise this into their own setting. If no corporate contingency plans exist, they should think about what plans they put in place to minimise disruption or downtime and increase performance when these situations arise. LG7. Demonstrate how a proactive approach to risk management has been implemented, including proactively educating and monitoring staff on health and safety and risk matters beyond the legislative minimum. So the trap is that they are just doing the minimum. So they should prepare to give examples of how they are proactively going beyond the minimum requirements to ensure that teams are working safely and are trained effectively with records maintained. So moving on to some general hints and tips then. EPA reports. Now, all learners will receive an EPA report, and you can use these reports to analyse for your learners which particular areas or assessment criteria they struggle on. This will help you to continuously improve the quality of your learning programmes. Now, there are lots of helpful resources available, including EPA kits. These have amplification to further describe the areas that will be assessed. There are think about documents for learners to help them for the endpoint assessment. Now, these are all available to download from our website. And last but certainly not least, mock assessments. These are a key tool at any level to help learners build confidence and practice. Ideally, carry out a mock exam presentation with Q&A and professional discussion with someone they're not familiar with to help prepare them for the big day. And that's all from me. Thank you for watching.